What kind of empire trembles at unarmed men, at fishermen with calloused hands, at slaves who own nothing, at ordinary citizens who refuse to fight back? Rome ruled the known world with iron discipline. Its legions crushed revolts, its laws bent nations to their knees, its emperors mocked foreign kings. And yet, when the name Christian was whispered in imperial halls, unease followed. This wasn't fear of rebellion. Christians weren't sharpening swords or planning coups. They weren't even resisting arrest. Still, Rome hunted them with a fury reserved for enemies of the state. Something about them struck deeper than armies ever could. It began quietly, almost invisibly. In crowded temple courts, voices rose, not in chants to Jupiter or Mars, but in the name of a crucified man. When Peter stood and declared that salvation existed in no other name under heaven, it wasn't just theology. To Roman ears, it sounded like defiance. Rome tolerated every god imaginable. Empires survived by absorbing religions, not excluding them. You could worship anyone as long as you worshipped everyone. That was the unspoken contract. But Christians broke it with a single word: only one God, only one Lord, only one name worthy of worship. That word cracked the foundation of Roman tolerance. Rome didn't demand belief. It demanded participation, a pinch of incense, 3 simple words: Caesar is Lord. Say it once a year and walk away free. Christians couldn't. To them, those words were not harmless. They weren't political, they were spiritual treason. To confess Jesus as Lord meant Caesar was not. And there was no room for 2 thrones. Officials tried to reason with them. Add your Christ to the pantheon. Burn the incense and pray however you like afterward. But Christians believed idols were not neutral symbols. They saw behind the stone and gold something darker, something deadly to the soul. Participation wasn't compromise. It was surrender. Life and death hung on what Romans considered a meaningless gesture. Man's religion in Rome was not confined to temples. It bled into meals, marriages, funerals, trade, and celebration. Every gathering began with sacrifice. Every festival honored a god. Every profession had its patron deity. Christians withdrew from it all. They wouldn't eat certain food. They wouldn't attend feasts. They wouldn't celebrate civic festivals. Entire neighborhoods noticed their absence. To Romans who prized unity above all else, this withdrawal looked like hatred for society itself. No, and then there were the rumors. Christians met before dawn or after dark. They gathered in homes behind closed doors. They called each other brother and sister. They spoke of eating flesh and drinking blood. To a suspicious empire, this sounded monstrous. Rome feared secret societies more than open enemies. Secrecy implied conspiracy. Whispers spread. Cannibalism, incest, treason. None of it true, all of it believable to those who had never seen a Christian worship. Families began to fracture. A wife believed her husband did not. A son converted. His father served as a temple priest. Slaves found dignity in Christ and refused household sacrifices. Roman law placed absolute authority in the hands of the father. When family members refused his gods, it wasn't just disagreement, it was rebellion. Households, the backbone of the empire, cracked under the strain. Money followed belief, and where money moved, anger followed fast. Entire industries depended on pagan worship. Idols had to be crafted, animals bred for sacrifice, incense sold, temples maintained, festivals funded. Christians bought none of it. In Ephesus, a silversmith watched his livelihood shrink as fewer people bought shrines. He named the problem openly. This new faith wasn't just insulting the gods. It was bad for business. Economic fear ignited public rage. Then came the accusation that baffled believers most of all: atheism. Christians worshipped constantly, yet Rome called them godless. To Roman minds, A god without a statue, a temple, an altar, or visible rituals might as well not exist. An invisible god worshipped in spirit and truth felt like no god at all. Worse still, Romans believed neglected gods punished cities. When earthquakes struck, plagues spread, or fires raged, the logic was simple. The gods were angry. Christians didn't honor them. Therefore, Christians were to blame. In the summer of Loxus AD, Rome burned. For days, flames devoured the city. Rumors pointed toward Nero himself. To survive politically, he needed someone despised, powerless, and expendable. Christians were perfect. Arrests followed. Executions turned theatrical. Some were torn apart by dogs. Others were crucified. Some were coated in pitch and set alight to illuminate imperial gardens. Death became spectacle. Terror became policy. What began locally spread outward. There was no single law declaring Christianity illegal. Instead, persecution thrived in ambiguity. Governors decided case by case. One city ignored Christians, another slaughtered them. You could live in peace for years, then lose everything overnight because a neighbor accused you. Trials were simple. A statue, a fire, a pinch of incense, freedom for compliance, death for refusal. Banned officials didn't understand why anyone would choose death over a gesture. They pleaded. They delayed. They urged Christians to think of their children, their parents, their future. Some complied. Others stood firm. And Rome discovered something terrifying. People who feared God more than death could not be controlled. When disasters struck, mobs took over. Christians to the lions echoed through streets. Violence erupted without warning. Homes were burned. Families dragged into arenas. Christians did not fight back. They endured. They prayed. They sang. Their refusal to resist sometimes unsettled even their killers. Torture followed. Slaves were stretched on racks, burned, torn with hooks. Officials wanted names, locations, leaders. Some broke. Others did not. Young women. Elderly men. Slaves with nothing to gain held their silence or prayed aloud as their bodies failed. Loyalty like that shattered Roman assumptions. Slaves were supposed to cling to life at any cost. These chose death to protect others. Execution brought profit. Confiscated property flowed into imperial coffers. Accusers received rewards. Governors funded projects with the wealth of the condemned. Persecution became profitable. Wealthy Christians became targets. Faith now threatened not only life but legacy. Homes, land, businesses vanished in a single verdict. The arenas filled, lions charged, fires burned, crowds cheered, until sometimes they didn't. Christians went to their deaths without screams, without curses. They sang hymns. They prayed for executioners. Peace replaced terror, and it disturbed the watchers. Some left shaken. Some sought answers. Some converted. Then what Rome intended as deterrence became testimony. Martyrdom preached louder than sermons. The faith spread through blood. Believers recorded these deaths, told the stories, passed them on. They remembered faces, final words, songs sung in flames. Then, when persecution paused, a new crisis emerged. Those who had stood firm judged those who had broken. Churches split. Mercy clashed with purity. Guilt crushed the lapsed. Grace fought to survive alongside justice. The wounds left by persecution ran deeper than scars. And yet, beneath it all, something remarkable had formed. Networks, signals, safe houses, codes scratched in dirt, hidden rooms, underground passages, scriptures memorized, copied, hidden, support for widows and orphans, training for arrest, preparation for suffering. Christianity adapted, hardened, survived, pens joined blood. Writers defended the faith with reason and clarity. They exposed lies, challenged injustice, and showed Rome a people more moral, more loyal, more peaceful than their accusers. The empire tried again, harder, more systematic. Churches destroyed, scriptures burned, leaders imprisoned, everyone forced to choose publicly. And still, it did not work. Buildings fell, worship continued. Leaders died, others rose. Books burned, words lived in memory. After centuries of trying to crush it, Rome faced an uncomfortable truth. This movement could not be eliminated by force. Immense persecution scattered believers, but scattering only spread the message further. Regions of refuge emerged. Faith crossed borders. What was meant to erase Christianity carved it deeper into history, and as the empire exhausted itself trying to silence a people who would not bow, a question lingered in the air, unanswered and unavoidable. What kind of truth makes ordinary men and women choose death over denial? And why did their silence speak louder than Rome's roar? And that question slowly stopped being asked out loud, because Rome began to sense the answer, and it was unsettling. Truth, when believed absolutely, rearranges fear. It relocates it. Death no longer stands at the top of the hierarchy. For Christians, judgment did, eternity did, and that shift quietly dismantled Rome's greatest weapon. Bendy as decades passed, persecution changed shape. It was no longer just mobs and sudden violence. It became organized, bureaucratic, systematic. Records were kept. Certificates were issued to those who sacrificed to the gods. Anyone without proof lived under suspicion. Faith became something you either hid perfectly or displayed courageously. There was no middle ground. Yet the empire faced a paradox. The harder it pressed, the more visible Christianity became. Soldiers guarding prisoners listened to hymns. Judges noticed how the accused refused to beg. Executioners watched victims forgive with their final breath. Curiosity replaced contempt. Contempt gave way to doubt. Doubt opened the door to belief. Even within the legions, conversion spread. Men trained to kill now refused to swear oaths to divine emperors. Some laid down their weapons. Others served without worship. Rome had never faced an enemy that infiltrated hearts instead of borders. Plagues swept through cities. While priests fled and temples closed, Christians stayed. They cared for the sick, buried the dead, fed the abandoned. Many died doing so. To Rome, survival was power. To Christians, love was obedience. In the aftermath, entire neighborhoods remembered who remained when fear emptied the streets. The empire noticed something else. Christian communities were unusually resilient. When fathers were executed, the church cared for their children. When homes were seized, believers shared resources. When leaders were killed, others stepped forward without hesitation. The structure did not collapse because it was not built on one man, one city, or one throne. Dan's philosophers began engaging Christians publicly, trying to dismantle the faith with logic. Instead, debates spread it further. Christianity wasn't superstition, as Rome had assumed. It had history, ethics, prophecy, and coherence. It answered questions Rome's gods never addressed: suffering, guilt, meaning death, pain, persecution, intensified one final time under emperors who believed total destruction was possible. Churches were razed, scriptures hunted. Anyone refusing sacrifice lost legal rights. This was meant to be the end, the purge that would erase the name of Christ from memory. It failed. Within a generation, the unthinkable happened. The empire that once burned Christians alive now legalized their worship. Soon after, emperors bowed to the very name their predecessors tried to erase. The cross, once a symbol of humiliation, stood above imperial banners. Catacombs gave way to cathedrals. Prison hymns became public worship. Rome did not defeat Christianity. Christianity outlived Rome. The irony was complete. The empire that feared Christians for refusing to call Caesar Lord collapsed under leaders who could not command loyalty. The faith that refused violence conquered without armies. The movement built on martyrdom reshaped civilization. What began as a handful of believers willing to die rather than deny their Lord exposed the fragility of absolute power. Rome ruled bodies, Christianity claimed souls, and history revealed which authority endured. The blood Rome spilled did not drown the faith, it watered it. And even after Rome's banners faded and its marble crumbled, the logic of persecution did not disappear with the empire. It merely changed uniform. New powers rose, new authorities claimed absolute loyalty, and again, the same tension emerged wherever Christianity took root. Once more, rulers discovered that you could command obedience, but you could not command worship. The memory of Rome lingered like a warning written in ash. Empires learned from its mistake, yet repeated it anyway. Some tried softer methods, ridicule, marginalization, legal pressure. Others returned to prisons, fires, and blades. The strategy shifted, but the outcome echoed the same pattern. Wherever faith was crushed publicly, it survived privately. Wherever it was outlawed, it went underground. Wherever it was mocked, it matured. Christianity had been forged in suffering, and that history shaped its DNA. Believers expected opposition. They were not surprised by loss. They had inherited stories of prisons turned into pulpits, of chains that became credentials, of graves that became milestones. Persecution did not signal defeat, it confirmed continuity. What Rome never understood was that Christianity did not measure success by survival alone. It measured faithfulness. Losing power did not equal losing purpose. In fact, power often diluted what persecution refined. When Christianity later gained influence, wealth, and political favor, new dangers emerged. Compromise, complacency, corruption. Ironically, the faith that Rome failed to destroy by force would later struggle most when force was no longer used against it. Yet the early witnesses remained a standard no empire could erase. Their voices spoke across centuries, reminding future generations that the faith was born without protection, without privilege, without permission. It thrived not because it was safe, but because it was true to its convictions. Rome believed it was eternal. Christians believed only God was. That single belief reshaped how they lived, how they died, and how they endured. When the empire demanded allegiance, Christians gave integrity. When it demanded silence, they answered with song. When it demanded worship, they offered martyrdom. History remembers Rome for its power, its architecture, its laws. But it remembers Christians for something stranger and far more enduring. Their refusal to surrender the unseen for the visible, the eternal for the temporary, the truth for survival. And long after the roar of the arenas faded, after the incense smoke cleared, after the emperors' names were reduced to footnotes, the faith they tried to erase was still being whispered, still being sung, still being lived, quietly reminding every rising power that no empire, however mighty, can rule the conscience of those who fear God more than death. And so the story comes full circle, not with an ending, but with a mirror held up to every generation that follows. Rome is gone, but the question it faced remains. What do you do with a truth that refuses to die? What do you do with people who cannot be bought, threatened, or silenced? The early Christians left no monuments of stone. They built no empires of marble, yet their legacy outlasted legions. Their strength was not in numbers, weapons, or influence, but in conviction. They believed that what waited beyond death was greater than anything an empire could offer or take away. Rome tried fire, iron, fear, and spectacle. None of it worked. because you cannot execute an idea whose foundation is eternity. You cannot intimidate a people whose hope lies beyond the grave. And you cannot extinguish a faith that grows brightest in the dark. This is why their story still matters, not as ancient history, but as a reminder. Power can dominate bodies, but truth shapes souls. Empires rise by force and fall by force. Faith endures by sacrifice. When Rome demanded worship, Christians chose faithfulness. When threatened with death, they chose loyalty. When offered life in exchange for denial, they chose eternity. And in doing so, they exposed the limits of every earthly power that would come after. The arenas are silent now. The fires are cold. The empire is dust. But the question remains, echoing through time, what is worth living for and what is worth dying for?